All right, so I promised you last week as we finished up the prayer series that we'd be starting a new series today. Not what we're doing. So somehow in my own head, even though it was in print, we're not starting till next week because it all has to line up with Easter. So we're doing something different today. So if you were with us last week, we finished up the prayer series and we finished up in the Old Testament. This thing's not coming on. Of course. Phew. So last week we finished up our prayer series, and we finished up in the Old Testament. We were in the book of Ezra. And if you were with us, you remember we were talking about how Ezra was about to make the journey from the Babylonian Empire to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. And the two things you need for a journey like that, you need supplies and you need protection. And so they elected, Ezra felt like they were supposed to just count on God's protection, like they had the option of, hey, we could ask the king for protection. In fact, Ezra and Nehemiah, we talked about how those two books go together. So in Nehemiah, when Nehemiah would make the journey from Susa to Jerusalem, he would take the king's protection. So there was nothing wrong with taking the king's protection, but Ezra felt like, you know what, we've talked about who God is, and I think having talked about who God is and how we can count on him, we should just count on God to protect us, which practically meant they had a 900-mile walk of trust. Like, that's a big one. So it was a big deal to take that step out and to say we are counting on God to watch over us. So here's what I want us to do today. I want us to press into the idea of trusting God again today. So we're going to start by reading this verse together. Verses you know well, probably many of you have them memorized, but we're going to read it together, and then we're going to talk about this. We're going to unpack this idea a little bit because there's some good stuff for us. So here we go. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. So great verses, right? Like if you're going to rank the top 10, that's in there, right? Of the best Bible verses, probably in your top 5, maybe top 3. Like this is a great one to quote. And living this one out, well, it's harder than it sounds sometimes. So let me start with this. As we talk about this idea of trusting God, let's separate out for a minute faith and trust. Now, we use those interchangeably, right? I mean, if I say faith, you know I mean trust. If I say trust, you know I mean faith. But looking at the words themselves, and let's start grammar here. So faith is a noun. Faith is something you have, something you possess. So when I have faith, I have complete trust or confidence in someone or something, and that confidence is something I carry with me. You following? And so remember the event, there was an event in the New Testament when the disciples head out across the lake and the storm comes up on them, and Jesus is in the boat with them, and so the boat is being swamped with water, and they're like bailing water for their lives, and they're like, we're not going to make it. And so Jesus is in the boat, and they're like, Jesus, you got to help us. And then Jesus turns around and like blows everybody away because he speaks to the storm and just says, be still. And then it stopped. Like, what a surreal moment, right? Picture like the waves and the wind that were whipping all of a sudden, like, and they're dying down, and you're like, okay, that was not what we were expecting. But then Jesus asks this question, so interesting. Where is your faith? That's an interesting way to ask it. Like, did you leave it on the shore? Like, did you not bring it in the boat with you? Where is your faith? Like we would forget a phone or a wallet. Like, where's your phone? Oh, man, I don't have it. And so Jesus asks this question, where is your faith? See, when I have faith, I carry with me the sense of complete trust and confidence, specifically in God. So now let's talk trust. So trust can also be used like a noun. That's why we use faith and trust interchangeably. But most times trust is a verb. So it's an action. So trust is to believe in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. And this is an action word. So trust is something you do. Trust is, let's describe it this way, the outward expression of the faith you possess. So you have faith, then trust is the demonstration of that faith. So book of James. James said these words, faith without works is dead, like useless. So what's he describing? The kind of faith that has no tangible expression of trust or obedience. The evidence of your faith is the action of trust or obedience. So we trust in God's character, we trust in God's word, we trust in his principles. So faith and trust. Faith is that thing you possess, and then trust is the expression of that faith that you possess. You all with me so far? So here's what I want us to do today. Today's going to feel a little bit different. Today I want us to talk about trust in as practical of terms as we can. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use a couple of pictures, more than we would usually use, kind of ideas and illustrations to help us get our minds and our hearts around this idea of what it means to really trust God. So we're going to use kind of some parables and some analogies that are going to help us unpack this idea of trusting the Lord with all of your heart. So here's the first image. Trust the Lord with all your heart. So I'm going to take you all the way back to when I was in middle school. So it was like 12 years ago. Give or take. So when I was in middle school, I was at camp, and the youth pastor was giving a message, and he was talking about faith and what this looks like, to live out your faith in real life. And so the way he started to unpack it for us is, so let's start with a scientific principle. And so the principle he explained is the pendulum principle. Everybody knows the pendulum principle, right? Yeah, but we'll just remind you, just in case, for the couple that didn't know. So the pendulum principle means, so you've got a pendulum, right? And that pendulum will always move toward a state of rest because of the pull of gravity. So that's the pendulum principle, is that pendulum will always move toward a state of rest. So practically, picture pushing a kid on a swing. When you stop, they immediately start to slow down and then say, push me, because of the pendulum principle. So another practical outward aspect of that pendulum principle is, so when that pendulum swings, it will never return to the point where it started because it's moving toward a state of rest. And so the youth pastor is explaining to us, so you understand the pendulum principle, right? And so then he starts to show us. So he's got a little board, and he's got a chalkboard and a string and a weight, and so he would pull it back, and he'd make a mark, and he'd say, okay, so now watch, and he'd let it swing, and sure enough, it would never come back to that mark. And he demonstrated it to us a few times. He's like, so that's the pendulum principle. Is there anyone here who believes in the pendulum principle? And we're all like, well, duh. You just showed it to us over and over again. And so he said, okay, so now let's make this a little more practical. He said, I need a volunteer. And so one kid steps out, and he unveils a bowling ball hanging from a rope in the rafters. And he says, all right, so I need you to stand right here. And he stands the kid up right in front of us all. And he pulls the bowling ball up till it touches his nose. And he says, pulls it back for a second. He says, so you believe the pendulum principle, right? And he's like, yeah. And so he said, okay, so you know this ball cannot hit you. It cannot return to this point on your nose. So this is the pendulum principle. And so he pulls the ball back all the way to his nose, and he lets it go, and it starts swinging back, and that kid just dove off of his spot. And the youth pastor's like, do you understand the pendulum principle? Do you believe it? And so he would try again, and of course we're all in the seats like, it's the pendulum principle, dummy, just stay there, right? So it took a few times, but eventually after several turns, he stood there like this with his, and that bowling ball, sure enough, stopped a few inches short and swung back. But it was a process of taking what he believed and knew to be true and standing there and acting on that. You following me? So this is a super practical way for us to understand what it means to stand or act on what we say we believe. So faith is demonstrated through active trust. So in the instance we just gave you, because I believe in the pendulum principle, I trust I can stand here and that bowling ball will not hit me. But here's what we just described in that scenario. While I know that is true, when I see that ball coming toward me, I have some other instincts that are not in line with what I know to be true. And so those kick in, and I begin to duck and dive and dodge, while I know, you showed me over and over, I know this is a principle that you can't defy. But when that ball's coming toward me, I don't feel quite as confident. See, faith is demonstrated by active trust. So let's go back to these verses that we read together at the beginning. Really good ones, right? You've memorized them. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. So here it is. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, regardless of what you feel, regardless of uncertainty, of unease, of discomfort, of the unknown, of the unpredictable. Just trust the Lord. So one of the interesting things is if you read through your Bible, you will find all kinds of stories of people who did that well, right? But you know what you'll also find? People who struggled to do that well. The Bible is pretty honest in how it portrays. So we've got lots of examples of people who trusted the Lord well and others who didn't do it so well. And it's interesting because when we talk about this idea of trust, and we've mentioned this before, but it's so much easier to tell somebody else to trust when I have nothing on the line. So with the example of the bowling ball, like it was great fun for us to be in the seats watching him duck and dive and be like, come on, dummy, it's the pendulum principle, right? Like, you know this is true, but we're sitting in the seats. We're not the ones standing there watching the ball come toward our face. And so it's different, right? When you're the one who has something on the line. Somehow trust feels a little more complex when I've got something invested in it. So there are times where we're doing our best, right? I'm forced to trust with all of my heart. And that's an interesting phrase, right? All of your heart. All of it. Nothing held back. So I'll talk for me, not for you, but here's how it feels occasionally. Well, try to trust the Lord right now. You've been there, right? Or, well, trust him at least a little bit. Start there. Or, okay, so trust the Lord as much as you can right now. See, all of those leave some wiggle room, but what's described in this verse is something much fuller and more encompassing. All is a fairly inclusive word, isn't it? It includes everything. So when it says trust the Lord with all of your heart, it is not describing a wishy-washy kind of trust. It's describing something that you can put all of your weight on. Nothing held back. Nothing in reserve. Like that word all just doesn't have a lot of wiggle room. But in the end, here's what I want us to recognize. That trust is a choice we make, not something we feel. We tend to equate trust with a feeling. I feel like I can trust. But trust is a choice. So again, go back to the bowling ball. You know a principle to be true. Trust is choosing to stand because of what I believe. It's an active expression of faith. So what are your alternatives to trusting the Lord with all of your heart? Well, I guess the one other extreme is you don't trust him at all with what's going on. But probably where we would land is the more likely option of trusting God to some degree. To whatever degree I feel like I'm able. So go back to our verse. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Or don't depend on your own understanding. So this line right here, this is where we feel the weight and the risk of trust. If I don't understand or can't make sense of it, then trust is a whole lot harder. So take this translation, don't lean on your own understanding. This brings us to our second image. So to lean on something is to use something to help support you. So think a cane or a crutch or a walker. Like the idea is you use that to lean on to shift some of the weight, right? So if you injure your knee, the purpose of the crutch is you lean on that and you take some of the weight off that injured knee. So when we lean on something, we're shifting our weight in order to protect or navigate in some way. So in this idea of trusting God with all of your heart is like all of your weight. But when you lean on your own understanding, then you're trying to find something else to put your weight on, like a crutch. So I can just make sense of some things. If I can just see what God is up to. And so there's this weird feeling that trust feels conditional. Like I just want to be able to put some weight on my own understanding, like a crutch. Like I don't have a problem with trusting the Lord with all my heart, as long as it makes sense. Like, isn't it weird how much our being able to understand or make sense of something helps? Trust. But trusting the Lord with all your heart means even if I can't make sense of it, I choose to trust. So let's give a really practical illustration of that from Scripture. David. So David was anointed as he's a shepherd out in the fields, and Samuel finds him and anoints him to be the next king of Israel. So shepherd boy working out in the fields, to king. That's a pretty big leap, right? And so after he's anointed, like for David, there's no way to even envision how he gets from shepherd boy to king. Like what? How does that path even look or work? Like what does that look like? But then the whole Goliath thing happens, right? David steps onto the battlefield. He defeats Goliath. And guess what? One of the rewards for defeating Goliath was he gets to marry one of the king's daughter, which means David is now in the king's family. He's in the palace. Oh, okay. See, now I see what God's up to. Not only that, but after he defeats Goliath, David is a national hero. I mean, they're singing songs like, Saul is great, but David is amazing. Saul hated that song. But like they're singing this song like about David. Like the nation has a song about David. And so here's this guy who was a shepherd. He was anointed to be king. Who knows how that happens? But all of a sudden it's like, well, look what God is doing. Now I see. And so like to trust God that that path is working, like you're like, yeah, I can see that. So David is trusting God. But then it all changes, right? Saul starts chucking spears at him. And Saul, as the king, literally assigns the army the job to hunt David down and kill him because he's going to ensure that he never becomes king. And so David goes from an obvious path, like, I see what God is doing, to flee the country and stay hidden, hide in caves. So he's ducking in and out of caves. He's just trying not to be seen. And so David goes from, I can see the path to being king, to, so I don't know about the whole king thing. I'm just hoping to live to see tomorrow. Like that's how his story and his journey just changed. So here's what I want us to see. Whole different deal, right? Trusting the Lord when he's looking at that path, to trusting the Lord when he's ducking and hiding in caves and hoping to just see another day. Trust is different, right? The second one is much more of trust the Lord with all of your heart. And the challenge for us is, so what do you do when you don't understand, when you don't see the path, when you can't figure it out, when you can't say, I think this is how it's going to play out? Now we're to trust the Lord with all your heart. And by the way, you don't get the crutch of your own understanding on this one. You just have to trust. So let's talk quickly about our own lives. Like those places where you may be finding yourself trying to trust. Sometimes those places are bigger or smaller, but we all have those places where we're trying to trust God. Maybe you're in something where it feels like it's kind of a fog in front of me. Like I can't see far. I don't see a path. I just kind of see what's right in front of me, and that's all I can see. We'll come back to that idea. But here's what I want us to see, that whatever you find yourself in, whatever circumstances you're facing, or maybe it's not you, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a child, maybe it's a grandchild, but you know what it is, right? To be like, I don't even know how this goes, so I'm trying to trust the Lord. And so let's remind ourselves of a truth, sort of like the pendulum principle, that God is faithful, he's active, and he is with you, present in every season of your life. So those are the seasons when it feels obvious to you, and the seasons when it's not as obvious. It's true in the seasons where all you see is the fog in front of you, and it's true in the seasons when you see a clear path. But we have to come to grips with this truth. You may not have the luxury of leaning on your own understanding, so you come back to this truth. So look at the history of the Israelites. Let me show you how this truth keeps coming before us. So God promised to deliver his people from Egypt. We're going all the way back to Exodus, right? And none of that played out the way they thought it would play out. Like that deliverance story looked nothing like anybody hoped or imagined it would be. In some ways, it was better than anybody imagined, and in some ways, did it have to be that complicated? But here's what happens. Like they've been promised, you will be delivered from the Egyptian slavery. And so then it happens, like Pharaoh, after all these plagues, so you've got these miracles, and on the final plague, Pharaoh is like, just get out of here, go. And like, this is it. This is like the freedom that they've been promised. This is what you've been promised, deliverance. And so they're like, that's it, we're free. And so they start heading out, and they get to the Red Sea, and Pharaoh's like, what am I thinking? I just let a workforce go. We're going back. And so now they're backed up to the Red Sea. The chariots they can hear bearing down on them. The army is coming for them. And now they're standing with their backs to the Red Sea, and there's no option. Like there's no place to run. There's no place to hide. There's nowhere to navigate. And so they're looking at it and like, well, that was 5 minutes of freedom, and now we die. Like this is what it looked like. They couldn't, from where they were, backed up to the Red Sea, imagine any scenario where they find their way out. Nothing to hang on to, nothing to hope in, literally no way to lean on their own understanding, not even a tiny crutch. But listen, up to this point, where they're backed up to the Red Sea, just back up just a little bit, God had displayed his power and his favor in some unbelievable ways. Like crazy, mind-boggling, didn't even know God could do that kind of ways. Where he demonstrated his power and his favor. But right now, they're backed up to the Red Sea with no options and no answers and no hope. And so here's where I want to take us. Because in that moment, right there, they are faced with a question. I call it a faith question. And the question is, can I trust God in my present circumstances? Or can I trust God in these circumstances? So the Israelites, they had been delivered in dramatic fashion. They're leaving Egypt, backed up to the Red Sea, and now, like, they had to trust God for those circumstances, but now they're in the next set of circumstances, backed up to the Red Sea, and there's the question, can you trust God with these circumstances? And they have to answer the question now in these circumstances. And then God parts the Red Sea. What? Who saw that coming? Like we thought there were no options, but God made a way. And so the Red Sea parts, piles up on either side, a dry path through the middle, and they have one more massive reason to trust. And so, like imagine once you've exited the sea, you're like, faith is at an all-time high. Like here's what you know. God will come through. There's no reason to doubt it. You can trust him. You can count on him. And so they literally, we talked about this when we did the message on singing a new song. This is one of the places. They sang a new song. Like it's a national song celebrating God's deliverance through the Red Sea. So following that miracle and that praise song, they begin their journey from Egypt, fully free, and they're heading for the Promised Land. And only a few days into the journey, they're already against their first challenge. They have no water, which is a big deal. Like they're crossing through barren land, and they're already running out of water a few days in. And so once again, it feels like, and we have no options. Like this is a desert. What are we going to do? We're already running out of water a few days in. So look at this. They're a few days out of God parting the sea and walking on dry ground, right through the middle of it. But now, now they need water. So here's the question. Can you trust God for these circumstances? So yes, God did part the Red Sea, but we're not there now. Now we're here where we need water. Can you trust God for these circumstances? For this new crisis? There's the faith question again. And then, you know the story, God miraculously brings water from a rock. Okay, we have water. God comes through again. And so they're again, reason to believe, reason to bolster their faith. And then, then they ran out of food. And they're like, okay, so we're just journeying through the wilderness and we're running out of supplies. Like, we're going to die out here. So God had delivered them with miracles, but then they had to answer the question at the Red Sea. Can you trust him for these circumstances? And then they had to trust him when they ran out of water. Can you trust him for these circumstances? And now here they are, they're running out of food, and it's like, can you trust him for these circumstances? And of course, God provides the manna and would do that daily until their journey was done. But every time the new circumstances arise, they had to answer this question again, just like we do. And every time you are faced with that question, can you trust God for these circumstances? You have the opportunity to make a faith declaration. I can trust God with these circumstances. And you have the opportunity to step out and trust. So not just I can, but I choose to trust God with these circumstances, which may involve you having to do it without some limited understanding, without that crutch, just trusting his heart, his wisdom, his providence, his goodness toward you. Like, based on your circumstances, you may not have a lot to go on, but you get to answer the question. Can I trust God in these circumstances? And you and I have to make the decision then. I choose to trust God in these circumstances. Every time that question comes up, you have the opportunity to answer it and to step out and trust, to demonstrate faith. It's a choice, right? It's not about what you feel. It's what makes that bowling ball illustration so good, because all of us can imagine if that's swinging toward my face, no matter how many times you've showed me the pendulum principle, I'm diving. Like, my instincts, everything in me says, get out of the way. No matter what truth you've seen, just get out of the way. But here's where we are now. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. That is a choice that you and I make, not something you feel. If you're thinking trust is a feeling, you're going to get confused all the time. Trust is a choice. Trust the Lord with all your heart, and don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your path, or he will make your path straight. So the nature of the path that we're talking about means beyond the circumstances you're in. So here's where I am, but there's a path. I may not see it, so when they were backed up to the Red Sea, there was a path, but they couldn't see it, could they? That would be revealed, but they couldn't see it yet. When they didn't have water, they had no idea how that was going to play out, but there would be a path, water from the rock. When they were hungry, it would be manna every day. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. So let me leave you with one more image here as we wrestle with what this looks like. So some time ago, I found myself on I-75, and we've all been there, right, when traffic comes to a halt. And so you see those brake lights up ahead, and you're like, are we slowing down? Like, what's going on? And in this case, like, we came to a stop. And so there's a truck in front of me. I'm in the left lane, and I'm just like, you dumb truck. What are you doing in the left lane? Right? Like, why are you here? And as a bonus, there was a truck in the right lane. And so I'm stuck in traffic, and these two trucks in front of me, and I can't see anything. And, like, I had, like, this weird level of angst. Like, I'm like, Tim, get a hold of yourself. Like, what is the deal? Like, I mean, I've got some things I want to say to that guy driving the truck in the left lane. Like, what are you doing there? And, and I've got this, like stuff churning in me. And I'm like, man, this is a traffic jam. What is my deal? And not how I operate in every moment, but in that moment, I had enough wisdom to be like, Lord, what is going on? Like, I have a weird amount of angst that is not in proportion with this situation. What's going on? And as I sat there, looking at the back of this truck, like, I just wanted to peel out into the grass around it and get in front of it. And here's I started to realize. My angst was all wrapped up in one thing. I can't see. That's what it was. All I can see is the back of the truck. And here's what that did. See, there's a couple things that eliminated for me. See, if I can see, a couple things I can figure out. I can sort out why we're here, right? If there's a truck jackknifed across the road, like, okay, now I know why we're stopped. And somehow that helps, right? Or if it's on fire, or if there's construction, or a car broken down on the road, like whatever, a flat tire. Like, if I have some idea of why I'm here, I'm like, okay, I can settle in. But what if I don't get that? Then you just wait. And that feels maddening and frustrating, doesn't it? Second thing, if I can see, I can at least have some idea of how long I have to do this. Right? So if I look up and it's a bad accident, like, okay, just settle in, you're going to be a while. Or if I look up and as far as I can see, it's cars, like, okay, settle in, you're going to be here for a while. Or if I look up and I'm like, oh, it's just right up there, the flagman's letting everybody through, then I know, like, you don't have to seal yourself for much, like, it's coming. But not being able to see, I have no idea. So not only am I irritated because I don't know why I'm stopped, but I have no idea how long I'm going to be stopped. All because of the stupid truck in front of me. But here's what I want you to see. This is what we do with trust. What does it look like for you and I to settle in when whatever's going on in your life feels like all I see is the back of the truck? I mean, I desperately want to see around the truck. I desperately want to have some idea of why are we doing this? And I want to have some idea, like, how long. I just want to prepare my heart for how long. Like, if this is 2 years, I just need to know that this is 2 years of my life, and then I can steel myself for that. But if I can't see, now we're back to trust the Lord with all of your heart, and don't lean on your own understanding. So trust the Lord if all you see right now is the back of the truck. Two things need to happen in that trust. One, you have to find some measure of peace. And that, when I say find it, I mean, like, choose to say, okay, this is where I am right now. And then 2, not only I'm okay, this is where I am, but go back to that foundational truth. So God is active, and he is present in every circumstance. So, I'm okay. I can be here where all I see is the back of the truck. Not knowing how long I sit here, but I'm okay. And trusting the Lord, he's going to make the path straight up ahead. That he's going to clear what's going on ahead. Like this idea of trusting the Lord sounds so great, right? But when you really have to live in it, like when life is swinging at you and you're like, I probably should dive out of the way. This is where we are with this verse you know so well. So can you stand and make the choice to trust the Lord with all of your heart, without the crutch? Sometimes we get to lean on our understanding. Thank you, Lord. But there are times where you won't. And this is where you're at with Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. I choose to answer the question, can you trust God with these circumstances? And listen, just like the Israelites, you and I, we can look back on our lives and say, God did, God did, God did, God did, God did, but now I'm right here. I wonder if God will. The faith question. Will God meet me in these circumstances? And it's funny because no matter how many times he's met us before, these are the circumstances we find ourselves in. And this is where I need him to meet me. And so you answer the question. I choose to trust God for these circumstances. We get to be an encouragement to one another in this. We get to stand with one another. We talk about our red carpet prayer, but this is the opportunity for you to step out and say, I don't know what to do with these circumstances. I don't know what to do with the situation. I'm trying to trust with all my heart, but man, this is hard right now. I just want to dive out of the way. And so this place of prayer becomes a place where you get to wrestle through with that. Get somebody to stand with you, alongside you, to say, God's got you. That's what we get to do up here in the prayer space. My hope today is that in the most practical terms we can put all of this, is that you have a fresh understanding of this verse that you know so well. What does it look like to trust the Lord with all your heart and not lean on your own understanding? In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Can you put the scripture back up here real quick? I don't remember which slide it was, so I'm going to let you do it. So here's what I want us to do. We started out by reading it. I want us to finish by reading this, and then we're going to stand and sing together. But I want us to read this aloud together, and I want you to hear it now. I want you to receive it now. I want you to hear what we are saying that's so familiar and really take this in. So let's read this aloud together, and then we're going to stand and sing. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. I'm going to invite you to stand.